In this video tutorial, we're going to be removing both the front and rear wheels off this KLR so we can replace the tires. So the stock tires that come with the KLR, the Dunlops, aren't actually that bad of tires. They just don't wear long. And since we're overlanding, we want tires that wear a lot longer. So we're going to stick with the Dunlop brand, but we're going to use the Trail Max Missions. So we need to take the wheels off so that we can go to the dealer or tire shop and have these replaced. So we've got the bike up on the center stand. We've got it in neutral. Now we can start taking the rear wheel off. So let's get to it. First, you'll have to remove a cotter pin. However, we stopped using cotter pins. We took all ours out just because they're hard to reuse. We just end up using this, so every time you can just put it in there. And that keeps the wheel from backing out, so handy thing to have. We've also got a wrench from Motion Pro. The nice thing about this is you can use it to, if you've got a flat, you can help drive the tires back on, a tire iron on this side, and a 27mm on this side. The problem is that when you first get the bike, they tend to torque these nuts on too hard. And since this is made of aluminum, it can bend this. So the first time you use this, I'd recommend using a proper size socket and wrench that's not aluminum. So 27mm. That's on there good. Okay. Man, those things are torqued on way too tight. More than you need. Remove the castle nut. Archaic nut that you hardly see on any other motorcycles except the KLRs. Alright, so give a little bit of support to the rear wheel if you need to. Make sure you look at all the different parts. So we have a washer, and then you'll push this through, and then once you push it out, this little indicator will fall off as well. Make sure you look at the alignment, make sure that's aligned correctly, and you'll drive this up, pull the bolt all the way through until it comes out the other side. All right, also the indicator. And now you just move it forward a little bit. That should clear this chain. Pull the chain off and then just slowly lower it and back it out ever so gently. So once you get the chain side clear, you'll move on to the caliper side, the brake caliper. Just kind of keep this pushed up. So you might be able to pull the caliper up. It sits in this little slot, so watch that. Be careful not to put too much pressure on the brake line. And then you'll roll the wheel out. And then just set this back in that little slot so it doesn't fall out. So once you have the tire out, you'll see we have a spacer on the brake side. Looks like this. You have another little spacer here that looks like this on the chain side. So all together, it should look like this. You have that spacer. You have this spacer, of course the wheel goes here. You have the other indicator here, the washer, just putting it all back together. The washer will fit there. Then you have your castle nut, and then you'll have your pin. So that's how everything should fit back together. So now we've got the rear wheel off, we'll just clean it up a little bit so that we can take it to the tire guys, and they're going to swap the tire out for us. So this is not a video about replacing your tires on the side of the trail. There's lots of videos online about that. This is more just about taking the wheel off your KLR. We've got the rear wheel off, now let's move on to the front wheel. So this could be a little dangerous, especially if you're only using center stand like we are. I actually recommend using a work stand if you have one, but we don't have one. So in our case, we're going to use this block of wood. It's going to be about the same height as the bottom of the forks. So if we do not support the front forks, there's a good chance the weight of this bike is going to roll forward. It's going to roll off the center stand and become a huge mess. So let's avoid that if we can. So I'm just going to set this under the fork right now. It's at a slight angle, but it shouldn't be a problem. So Kawasaki went a little cheap with the tools that they supply with the bike. They didn't supply this or this, which they previously did in 2nd generation KLRs. So fortunately, you're able to get an upgrade kit from 3D Cycle Parts, and that includes the little Allen to remove the 2 front bolts, this 14mm hex head to remove the front axle, also the wrench that it matches up to that 14mm. It also matches up to the 27mm for the rear, and then it also has this little toolkit for removing the spark plug. So using the 8mm wrench supplied with the kit, we'll loosen these 2 front holding bolts. And this little Allen provides just enough torque to not over torque them. I think I was able to loosen them without too much trouble. Definitely don't want to over torque these. Okay, they're both the same size. Now we'll remove the main shaft that runs through the entire wheel assembly and the bearings. This is the part that's going to be on tight. Dang, that's on good. There you go. Okay, you can see the threads come out this side. Should be able to see the threads on the other side as well. Okay, there we go. And my helper, Chantil, is pulling it out. And we'll remove the front wheel. I'm still holding up the front of the bike. And then we'll put the block underneath it now. If you're going to do this in your own garage, definitely get somebody to grab onto the crash bars and make sure the bike doesn't fall forward while you remove the front wheel. So the bike is steady now. It's nice and secure. Let's look at what we have on the front wheel. We've also got spacers on the front wheel. So this is where the axle runs through it. You got a spacer on this side. It goes through here. We've also got a spacer on the other side. So make sure you take that one out and put everything together. So you should just have these 3 parts, 2 spacers and the axle bolt. Also, we've got the 2 retaining bolts that we'll screw back in here just to make sure we don't lose them. We've got all the tires loaded into the family wagon. Let's go get them changed out. We got new tires. All right, here they are, the new tires. We're gonna start with the front tire. Honestly, these things are a little heavier. I'm wondering if the KLRs are gonna be noticeably slower because of them, but we'll see. Let's mount them. Okay, so our bikes have been precariously balanced on these wooden blocks. Thankfully, we didn't have any earthquakes or anything. So the first thing we'll do is make things a little easier. We'll just spread these brake pads apart a little bit. So I just have a tire iron, something that doesn't have a sharp edge on it at all. And I'm just going to spread these apart just barely, make getting the rotors in there easier. As a reminder, these are all the parts we took off. We have these 2 bolts that tighten this section down here. Those are still there, just barely, just a couple threads. And then over here, we have the main shaft that runs through the wheel. We have a spacer on this side, and we have a spacer on this side. So we'll make sure those go back. We'll put those in the wheel right now. So we'll put the spacer on this side, and then put the other spacer on this side. There we go. And then we'll get the axle bolt ready by just putting a little bit of grease on it. Not too much, you don't have to go crazy. Just enough. It's probably more than enough, but just a light coat of grease. I'll rub that off. That's perfect right there. All right, so we got an assistant. I'm gonna raise the front up. I'm gonna roll this in. trying to get it all lined up, making sure we get the rotor right between the brake pads, and get this thing inserted in. Okay, you can lower it. There you go, perfect. Just feed it in slowly, line everything up. There we go. Okay, let's tighten this down. So we'll use our 14mm Allen and the little wrench, and we'll just tighten this, making sure everything's lined up. There you go. Start driving it in. So it's probably better to have like an actual wrench. So we have this interesting little tool here, since we don't carry a full ratchet, full-size ratchet, especially a 1/2 inch. So we just use the adapter here, and that should give us a little bit more torque. You can see we get a little more torque out of it. That feels pretty strong, but let's check it with a torque wrench, just to be sure. So this is the 3rd generation KLR650 service manual, and this lists all the torques and locking agents. It says for the front axle, you need to torque it to 98 Newton meters. The front axle clamp bolts are only 20 Newton meters, so let's use a torque wrench and see if we can get 98 or see how close we came. There we go. Now let's check the torque. Let's see how close we came. Well, there's definitely another 1/2 rotation or 1/4 rotation. Yep, so we got about that much rotation out of it still. So you could get by, I think, just using this, but it's not like we carry a torque wrench when we travel, so we'll just have to know that we're gonna have to really put some pressure behind this when we put it on. And then finally, these holding bolts, using the 6mm hex. These only go to 20 Newton meters, so I don't have a torque wrench for that, but did not over tighten them. Last thing you want to do is strip out all that aluminum in there. That's good. All right, the front wheel is on. We'll make sure that it rotates clearly once we get the back wheel on, and we can kind of put the front wheel and spin it. But until then, we want to make sure that we don't get surprised. Remember when we went in there and enlarged the space on the brake pads? Well, we want to make sure we pump the front brakes. Otherwise, they won't work when we need them. There you go, 5 or 6 times, and they're nice and strong again. Let's move to the back wheel. So now we're at the back wheel. Back wheel's a little more complex. Not too crazy though. If you put everything back in the same order, you shouldn't have a problem finding out how it goes back together. First, we'll start by making sure that the brake pads are extended so we can get the rotors in there. So we want to make sure that everything goes in nice and smooth. So make sure that the rear sprocket and everything looks good. Make sure it's aligned in there correctly. And there was something I noticed. We actually sent this over to the dealer, which we shouldn't have. We probably should have taken this and kept it with us before sending the tire over, but they made sure it stayed with the tire, so that's good. So make sure that's nice and aligned. Check that the brake section here is nice and aligned with the holes that we have lined up already. Push these all the way forward, these adjusters. Make sure the chain is out of the way. And now we'll add the spacers. So let's take this whole thing apart. We're keeping the idea the spacer will go on this side. That's why it's important to keep these aligned when you take them off, so you know where they go back. The spacer will go on this side. And then we'll lubricate this before trying to insert the wheel. So let's lubricate the axle. Same as we did the front. Just a little bit of grease, not too much. Probably enough. I always put more on than I need. All right, that's way too much. Just a light coat of grease. So have plenty of rags when you do this. It's gonna get messy. All right, that looks good. Now let's get the tire aligned and roll it in. The hardest part is getting the brake section lined up with the wheel, making sure the spacer doesn't get knocked out. All this fun stuff. There you go. Okay, starting to get it lined up. Pull that brake section back. There you go. So make sure all these holes line up in this side here before we insert the axle. This is probably the hardest part over here on this side. Alright, those look pretty lined up well. Making sure the pads are right over both sides of the rotor, which they are. So the problem is that when you put it on the center stand, there's not a whole lot of clearance between the brake calipers, because you have to kind of get it underneath there and you have to get it lined up. So don't force anything, have patience. Alright, so next thing we'll do is get the chain on there. We'll rotate the wheel all the way forward to help get the chain on. And then we'll line everything up and then get the axle rod through there. So if you're having problems, it might help to actually just loosen these tension adjusters. So I loosen both of them. That way we can move them all the way forward. Just we'll have to adjust the chain tension afterwards. So the next thing we'll do is put the tensioner position indicator things on. Gives us an idea where we're at. And then run the axle bolt through. You have to lift up this one on your foot. Usually I just got my foot right underneath it. There you go. That should get us halfway through. Then we'll line up the other side. Making sure everything goes real smooth. Check the brake caliper and everything. Make sure that lines up correctly. And then push the bolt through. Okay, now we got to push it back though, since we put this thing out. Make sure you don't go too far. All right, I'll put this back in. And line that up. Okay. Now the tension indicator, the adjustment. Washer, the castle nut, and tighten everything up. We're not going to tighten it yet though, because first we got to make sure we check the tension, the chain tension. So we'll just kind of loosely put that on. The specific tools that we're going to need for adjusting a chain are a 14mm wrench or a socket and a 12mm, and that's going to be used to adjust the nuts on this end here. So the nuts that you'll be adjusting are this 14mm here. This is the one that you actually use to adjust the tension. So when you tighten this nut, it's actually going to pull this entire axle to the back and make your chain tighter. When you loosen it to the left, it does the opposite. It actually moves the axle forward, and then your chain will be looser. The 12mm, you just loosen that, and then at the end, once everything's tightened up, that's your lock nut, and you'll lock that down. So this is the owner's manual. The whole procedure is in here where to adjust it. But the interesting things that we want to know is what the actual chain drive chain slack is. So in this case, it's 30 to 40mm or 1.2 to 1.6 inches. What we've done is we've actually taken those measurements and put them on the tire iron. So starting from here, this is going to be 1.2, and this is going to be 1.6. So we can just check our chain tension by putting this at the bottom of the chain and then checking it to make sure it's in between this range. So here's a perfect example of a disaster. This chain, as you can see, pull it all the way to the middle, mark the top of the chain, pull it all the way up to the top. That is way, 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 way too loose. So let's do some adjusting. So in this case, we're going to tighten, and you'll see this. You'll see this thing slowly come back as you do it. And make sure you do both sides evenly. Okay, so let's check the chain. And if you need the information, you can see it's right here, right on the swing arm. Chain information. And it shows you how it's supposed to be in spec here. But it stinks to have a ruler every time, so that's why we use this method, which works pretty good. All right, there we are, right in the middle of the range. So we're looking good. Before we tighten the bolt, let's just check the alignment. You can see the little marks are on the top of the swing arm here. And this is the left side. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, and about half. So these tend to move a little bit, so we just make sure they're pushed either forward or aft, depending on how you adjust it. We typically push them forward. So now they're happy with the alignment. Let's just tighten this castle nut down. Make sure nothing moves on us. So while you're tightening this castle nut, just be wary of how the alignment is so we can line up these holes. If it's not lined up to these holes where the slots are, you won't be able to get your pin back in. Okay, there we go. So now we've got the bolt tight. We can check the tension again. Another good way to do it on this particular bike is too, you can just pull up. If you can hit this little plastic point here where this chain guard is, if you can hit the chain guard with the chain, it's probably a little loose. In this case, we're not quite hitting it, so that's perfect. Okay, we're going back to the owner's manual. Looking at the tightening torque, it actually says 108 Newton meters. Also, this is interesting though. If the torque wrench is not available, this item should be serviced by an authorized Kawasaki dealer. So they don't trust you to tighten this nut if you don't have a torque wrench. So we're at 104. Let's add 4. There we go. And torque it down. All right, let's see how well we were able to torque it with just a regular wrench. Let's try it. Oh, pretty good. Yeah, not bad. And you can see the hole lined up perfectly in the slot. Then we'll insert the pin. In our case, we don't have a reusable, we have a reusable one. We don't have a cotter pin like you normally see. That just mounts right there. So this step sometimes can be forgotten. You'll know because you'll get to your destination and you won't have these 2 nuts anymore. So make sure you tighten them so you don't lose them. And once everything's done, just tighten that one, the 14, snug up the 12, and then tug up and tighten that 12 nut too. And do the same on both sides. And remember, we spread the brake pads apart, so we definitely want to make sure our rear brakes are pumped up, ready for our action. Good to go. So there you go, not too difficult. That's how you remove and install the wheels on a 3rd generation KLR650. And as an added bonus, we also threw in how to adjust the chain tension, which you're going to have to do from time to time as your chain needs adjustment throughout the lifespan of the chain and the sprocket. So a good thing to know, especially while you're traveling full time. So if you're interested in more KLR modifications, make sure you subscribe, like, and hit the bell icon so you can be notified of future updates.